Psalm 16 has been our text this week so far, and we're looking at the way David is processing his life, the difficulties that he faces, and how he is doing that by focusing in various directions. He is focused on God in verses 1 and 2 and sees his ultimate good in the Lord himself. Then he looked around him and he saw people, relationships. He saw the godly who he delighted in and wanted to be like and wanted to be part of. He saw the ungodly who had little use for the Lord, and he didn't want anything to do with them. He wanted to separate from them, not to be influenced by them. Then yesterday we saw that the Lord within has fulfilled so many needs in his life. As the Lord has worked in him and through him, he sees that the Lord has been there, has changed him, has transformed him, and he can look and see what the Lord has actually done in his life. Today we finish off the psalm by looking at the last 3 verses. And in these verses what we see is a picture or a focus on the future. What's going to happen beyond this life? What happens in the future? One of the things, by the way, we know in the Old Testament is that we don't have a full picture of the afterlife in the Old Testament. Most of what we know about life after death is found in the New Testament scriptures. There are hints throughout the Old Testament. The Old Testament saints knew this wasn't it. They knew there was something beyond. They didn't seem to have a real good handle on exactly what that was for the most part, just a few hints here and there. They knew they'd be resurrected from the dead. That was most clearly taught in Daniel chapter 12. So they knew certain things, but they didn't know what we know today. We're blessed in that regard. But what they did know, they trusted. And they trusted in what they did know because they could trust in the Lord who controlled the future. And so we look at David. David has confidence as he goes forward. He's not going to live in this life forever. He's going to die. He's a man like you and I. He's human. And so he knew he wouldn't be here forever. And so as he thinks about that future, as he gets older and thinks about that, he can have confidence in the future because of what the Lord has promised him. We see in verse 9, for example, "Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will dwell securely. You will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay." Sheol in the Old Testament was a picture of the grave, or the place of the dead. And although he knew he would one day go to the grave, he would physically die, David's confidence was that the Lord would not abandon him there. His soul would not stay in Sheol. This isn't it. Life doesn't end at the grave. There is more to come. You will not allow your Holy One to undergo decay. Now we know also that these verses are used in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, for example, to speak of Christ. And as the apostles were preaching the resurrection of Christ, they pointed back to these verses. David, I think, is speaking of himself. His body would not simply decay and be left in Sheol, but they have the application and even the interpretation of also referencing Christ himself. Christ would not stay in the grave. Christ would be resurrected from the dead. David's bones would disintegrate. They would turn to dust, and he would yet be resurrected by the power of God. That didn't happen to Jesus. He did not stay in that grave. He resurrected in 3 days, and these verses are used in the New Testament to point that direction. In verse 11, David moves to the future, however, and he says this, "You will make known to me the path of life, and in your presence is fullness of joy, and in your right hand there are pleasures forevermore." So not only will David not stay in the grave and will not be there forever, that he sees a future. He knows there's a future. But he talks about that more here. In this life, he has the path of life. While he's on this planet, the Lord leads him in the path of life. But there's going to be his presence and fullness of joy, not only now, but in the future. He says, in your right hand there are pleasures forever. In other words, what has begun here will continue there. What we have in this life is only a foretaste of what will be ours in the next life. So David could look to the future not knowing a lot of details. Even we lack a lot of details, but they didn't have near as much revelation on that subject that we have. But David, with all confidence, knew that he would enjoy the fullness of joy in the Lord at his right hand forever. You know, that's a great thing to consider as we think about the future, as the fact of death, that all people die, and yet, is that it? Or is there more? Well, David had absolute confidence that there was more, and not only would there be more, not only would there be an afterlife, because that could be anything. Matter of fact, multitudes will spend the afterlife in eternal destruction. But he speaks of a joy, of fullness at the right hand of the Lord, where there are pleasures forevermore. And these are promises given to the child of God as we walk with him now and ultimately in the future. And so David has looked at God, he's looked up, he's looked around at those who are walking this planet with him, he's looked within at what God has done, and he looks to the future at what God will do. And he ends the psalm by talking about his eternal pleasures forevermore. Well, I hope this has been helpful going through Psalm 16 this week. We're going to look at Psalm 27 to finish off our week tomorrow. So come with us and enjoy the scriptures with us tomorrow.